Hello, government students. So this is going to be a little bit about the philosophers that have influenced the American government. This particular video, hopefully, and we'll be able to do this all in one. This is standard 2. We're going to talk about substandards A and B. This will mostly be standard B. It's going to be a little bit of both. So we like to start out a lot of times by asking essential questions. So our essential question is, how did the Magna Carta, Petition of Rights, and the English Bill of Rights exhibit key ideas of consent of the governed, limited government, and due process in the rule of law? So as we go through this, we'll actually be able to answer that specific question. The basic ideas and principles of democracy are the consent of the governed. And we've talked a little bit about this already, but government gets its power from the people. It is the people's willingness to allow the government to, well, govern them. Limited government is not all powerful. It only has the ability to do what the people allow. And if you watch the videos on the 14 principles of democracy, that's one of the things that we talked about, and that there has to be a check on the power of the people who govern us. The rule of law is that laws should govern, not individuals. Laws that safeguard liberty. So what that means is that the laws are not just for the people, they're for everybody. So even the people who are governing are subject to these laws and should be following and agreeing to follow these laws. Due process, and this is the one that I think we as Americans hold pretty true to, that we feel that we should, or at least the state, and when we say state, we're talking about the term nation state, not specifically like the state of Georgia. So I'm using that term interchangeably. That they had to respect us as people, and of course the rights that are guaranteed to us. Personal liberty. We talked about this a little bit, a couple different times: life, liberty, and property, or as we Americans say, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, these are the ideas that we have discussed, but where did they come from? And that's the main focus of this one. We were a nation that was born of ideas. It's not about common culture, geography, or centuries of tradition. As a matter of fact, that is one of the great and wonderful things about the American government, is that, or the citizenry, are people that come from everywhere, and that's how our country got started. Is it was a group of people from all over that got together and well, we rebelled and then formed this new nation. So we got the signing of the Magna Carta, the Petition of Rights, and the English Bill of Rights. Now, these ideas, this is where they start in Great Britain, and we'll talk a little bit about that over these next few slides. So first off is the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta was basically a document that limited the power of the King of England and protected the rights of the nobility. It was written by the English nobility in 1215. The king at the time, at least the nobility, felt that he was becoming too powerful, and they needed some way to legally control him. And this was their legal way of saying, look, you have to agree that you are not all powerful, that you are subject to some laws. So the big ideas were limited government, rights, rule of law, and due process. The Petition of Rights of 1628 is one of England's most famous constitutional documents. It was written by Parliament as an objection to an overreach of authority by King Charles I. Charles came to power, and historically speaking, and we'll talk a little bit about this when you get in like your world history class, or even maybe even some in your U.S. history classes, about how this kind of came about. But the short of it is that there was a difference in beliefs as far as religion that permeated the reign of the English monarchy, and not only did the Protestants rebel, but also the Parliament rebelled. And this is one of the things that they said, we have to, let you know that, you have limits. So no taxes without Parliament consent, no imprisonment without cause, no quartering of soldiers in citizens' home, and no martial law in peacetime. And up until this point, the king could kind of do whatever he wanted to, even if Parliament said no. But by signing this, at least in 1628, he was agreeing to it. Now, what you'll learn in future history classes is within about a year, he just basically says no to this and goes back to business as usual. Once all the turmoil, all that is over, we end up with the English Bill of Rights. This expanded the powers of the English Parliament and expanded the rights of the people, as well as further limiting the right of the king. It was written in 1689 by English Parliament. At this point, what we have seen is a change from monarchy to basically, well, Oliver Cromwell will call himself the Lord Protector, but he is essentially a dictator for about a decade. He dies, and then we get the monarchy back. And as time goes on through the House of Stuart, eventually Parliament has kind of had enough of this absolute monarch belief system, and they start taking the power away from the monarchs. And now we're left with, or at least today's modern day English rule is through this constitutional monarchy. So the monarch is more of a figurehead, and it's the Parliament that has all the power. So it limits the government, the rights, due process, and of course the rule of law. So the next essential question is, how did the previous documents exhibit key ideas of consent of the governed, limited government, and due process and the rule of law? So there's the question again. Now we need to know who came up with these ideas. We know what the ideas were. So it's of consent of the governed, limited government, due process, and the rule of law. That's the question we're asking. So Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Baron de Montesquieu, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So Thomas Hobbes, who lived from 1588 to 1679, a little bit of background about him. He was born during the English Civil War, which was definitely a time of political and social uncertainty. He fled to Paris as a youth, and he wrote the book The Leviathan. And there is Mr. Hobbes. Hobbes said that the condition of man is a condition of war of everyone against everyone. And that is definitely an interesting statement. No arts, no letters, no society, and which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death, and the life of man, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. What he was talking about was anarchy. He was talking about the state of nature. If you guys remember from our previous discussions, when we talked about the state of nature and how it is necessary to be governed. In the state of nature, profit is the measure of right. So his views on society were he considered all humans to be naturally wicked and evil. And some of you guys watching this video probably just chuckled a little bit and go, "Yeah, I agree." It is about competing about. So we have this saying, this whole survival of the fittest. It is about greed and self-interest, and this is still even true today. And some would say that no, nobody can be trusted, and the whole might makes right. So the person that has the most power is, of course, the one that's right. But we are in a constant state of war due to selfish and scarcity, and this is something that is still somewhat true, but in a more civilized society. Uh, we have this social contract with each other to, live in peace, if you will. And this social contract, as you will see, will extend into how we feel about how we're governed. So his view on government is, since we can't be trusted, he believed that the best government is absolute monarchy. So he actually believed that we should have one person in charge, and this is from his book, The Leviathan. He said that a gross, ugly sea monster with the power to devour everything. He basically believed that we should subjugate ourselves to one person and just leave all the decisions to one person. The problem with that is that sometimes you give up your freedom, your security, and once you give up that freedom, it's not impossible, but it's tough to get it back. And sometimes you lose your life in that pursuit of freedom. But yeah, he said people can't be trusted. He says the monarch is the best. Humans and nations are selfish. Both are constantly battling for power and wealth. Government is created to protect people from their own selfishness. So the government is essentially there to protect us from ourselves. I think that Hobbes was not completely wrong, but there are definitely more points to it. Which brings us to John Locke. He was born in 1632 and lived until 1704. He was born after the English Civil War had peacefully concluded, and he believed in religious freedom, especially Protestantism, and that was the predominant thought at that point in time. And it's not a far leap to believe that the way that he was raised led to his philosophy. There were some revolutionary ideas that led him to flee to Holland. Not specifically important for you to know at this point because we're talking more about the government of it and not specifically the history of John Locke. So he returns to England and he forced the king to accept he was one of the people that helped force the king to accept the English Bill of Rights. He writes a book, Two Treatises of Government. And this is Jean Locke. Not really sure why I said it with a funny accent there, but so here are some of the things that he said. Every man has a property in his own person that nobody has a right to but himself. All mankind being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, and possessions. The reason why men the reason why men enter into society is the preservation of their property. Where there is no property, there is no injustice. So John Locke is saying that our body, our person, is our own property, and we should have the free will to do with it whatever we will. And that extends to any physical property that we own, but more specifically to ourselves. So his views on society is that all humans are naturally capable of rational thought. So he starts taking a little different view than Hobbes. He says that all humans use reason to settle differences and compromise. This state of nature is one of total liberty and freedom. And it is total liberty and freedom, but it's about how people choose to live with each other. Natural reason results in natural equality between all humans. And I think that as you guys watch this video and hear me talking about this, you probably have some thought processes about how not everything is naturally equal. And even though we talked about the principles of democracy, that even within equality, it's not equal. Humans all depend on property to satisfy their survival needs. And so if you take a sociology look at it, or there's a guy named Maslow, and he based his theory about the human process on his hierarchy of needs, and he draws this pyramid, and at the very base of this pyramid, what is considered the base needs of all people is food, clothing, and shelter. And so what Locke is saying here is that this whole principle that Maslow has about survival is about being able to have somewhere to live and have be able to protect yourself and feel free to do so. So with the social construct extending into government, he believes that yes, we are naturally rational, that we use reason to govern ourselves independently. He rejects the divine right, that whole that God says you are, or any one person is, supposed to rule. He focuses more on the individual. And it is about being able to protect life, liberty, and property. And again, I like to mention this every time because he does have an influence on how we shaped our country here in the U.S. So it is about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And when we, at this point in time, getting property is that whole pursuit of happiness. You're, being able to take care of your family, having somewhere to live, and do as you please. He comes up with the idea of limiting power by separating the power amongst different groups of people, which leads to checks and balances. And this is, as you will see as we discuss more of this, this is how we end up with a three-part government with no one portion of the government having the most power, and so they can distribute the power and check each other to make sure that nobody is doing stuff that they're not supposed to. So he says that we do enter into a social contract that allows the government to basically rule for us, make laws, and act in our best interest. However, if they don't act in our best interest, if they threaten any of these ideas of life, liberty, and property, we have the right to peacefully or even non-peacefully rebel. Now, and I said this before, I think in a previous video, the brilliance of the American Constitution and our whole American political system is that we have the legal right to peacefully overthrow the government every 2 and 4 years, and we do so. And that's part of that whole 14 principles of democracy when we talk about not only having the free and fair elections, but accepting the results of them. So his contract theory is that people have the right to life, liberty, and property, that government rises from contract between the ruler and the people who are being ruled. And the people are actually subjugating themselves and allowing this ruler to have the power. And that the ruler has to understand that they can't deny people their basic rights. So there's John Locke again. Alrighty, so we're going to pick up part 2 because we're about 20 minutes into this, and we'll pick up here with Baron to Montesquieu. So this is the end of part 1. We're talking about the philosophies and how government is formed and where some of these ideas come from within Standard 2 of the Georgia American Government and Civics Educational Standards. So my name is John Newton, and thanks for watching.